Welcome. You are listening to the Great Brook podcast. Each week, Maura Snow and Tanya Middleton discuss issues in the workplace and take a page out of their personal life experiences to discuss potential solutions.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karine Joseph. I am the producer and editor for the Great Brook podcast, and I'm also the person who is in charge of taking care of all those wonderful social media posts that keep cropping up on your timeline. If you're wondering who's in charge of that, that would also be me. Today, I am with Maura Snow, one of the co-hosts today. And so today I will be interviewing Maura, and we're going to get a chance to know a bit more about her and her past and what brought her all the way here to making this podcast now in 2022. So Maura, thank you for welcome to this episode.
Thank you.
So I know the way you wanted us to do this was you wanted us to play a game, and well, not a game, it's a decade-by-decade overview.
Right.
That is about 3 minutes each. So why don't you explain to the audience how that goes, and then we can get started.
Yeah. Well, I like this method. It's something that we use sometimes with team building exercises for groups of people trying to get to know one another in the workplace. Everyone takes their age and divides by 5. And however many age year increments that comes up with, right? If you're 50, it's 10-year increments. If you're 20, it's 4-year increments. And you get a certain number of minutes, anywhere between 1 and 3, and describe your life for those increments. Now, for myself, I am going to be 63 in April, true confession. And so I'm going to do 12-year increments. But I'm using this for our podcast. So I'm focusing on each 12-year increment. I'll tell you a little bit about my life, and I'm going to focus on racial awareness and what was going on, because that's where Tanya and I like to go with things when we can, because that was the point of the podcast. However, teams can use this for innovation, curiosity, leadership, whatever they're pursuing about themselves, and each person can share what they experienced during that first decade, or maybe it's a 5-year period, again, depending on their age. So everyone gets 5 chunks of time to talk about. I've asked you to give me 3 minutes per chunk, but it's fine if I go less. And then you can, after I've taken my 3 minutes for each, do some follow-up questions, which I have provided some that I had hoped Karine would ask so that we can flesh some things out. But she's also going to time me, so I may be mid-sentence, and she's going to say, Maura, we're at 3 minutes here, and then I do have to move to the next segment. So it's just a way of helping people to share whatever they want to share. And it's important to tell them in advance that they're going to do this so they can think it through, and nobody has to share anything they don't want to share. So that's where we'll roll.
I'm just setting up the timer now, the 3-minute timer. So, okay, so I have to have a mental checklist. This is going to be the first 3-minute segment, and you said it's going to be in 12 years.
This is ages 1 through, birth through 12.
Birth through 12.
Yeah.
We're going to start with the first 12 years of Maura's life. So start when you're ready.
All right. I was born in 1959 to parents who met in acting school. They lived together in various places in New York City. My mother's family was horrified that she had had a baby not being married to some actor she met. My father's parents said, "Cool, a baby," and took me under their wing and helped to raise me. And that was the story of most of my upbringing, is that I spent summers and weekends with my father's family. My parents lived in New York City, and they lived out on Long Island in Valley Stream, if you know the area. So that's where I spent a lot of my growing up. So Mom and Dad split up when I was 2, but I stayed very close to my father's family. Mom and I moved practically every 2 years. She was a bit of a counterculture hippie type, I think is an archetypal way to describe it. She would disagree somewhat. But anyway, we had a rather roaming existence. We didn't have much money, but we had a lot of love for one another and traveled about a bit, as I said, about every 2 years. So I was changing schools a lot. We mostly lived in the New York area. but also spent a few months in Oakland, California, and an entire school year in Berkeley, where I have a quick story of race. While I was in Berkeley, it was announced that next year, all of the kids in my mostly white school were going to be put on buses and sent to the mostly black school down the road. And so they wanted us to meet who our playmates would be. So they invited all of the kids from the mostly black school to come play on our playground and said, poof, you kids go out there and play together. And we'd never met. Nobody made introductions. We all just stood around and wondered what we should do when I saw a group of girls in the corner get out some jump ropes. And I said, jump rope, I know that one. So I ran over there because I know how to jump rope. And I said, oh, can I play jump rope with you? And they said, yeah, sure. Well, here comes a cultural problem. They jumped double Dutch. I only knew how to jump a single rope. So they let me try. They gave me first spot in the line and said, okay, come on. And I looked at it and I said, I don't know how to jump in. And they said, all right, we'll start it while you're in there and we'll do it slow. And I said, okay. So they started. They did it slow. I got tangled up in the ropes. I fell to the ground. I was hurt and embarrassed. And one of them said, would you like to try turning the ropes? We can teach you that. And it's this crossover motion. So I learned to turn double Dutch. And I turned it, and every time all the girls finished and it was the next girl's turn to start again, someone would turn to me and say, do you want to jump? And I always had to say no, and I never did learn double Dutch, but I can turn. So was that my 3 minutes?
You have 25 seconds left.
Well, okay, that's double Dutch. It was just interesting to not know how to do it and to have never learned it, and that no one facilitated the process whereby we children might get to know one another. But we can move on to the next 12 years. You ready to start?
Okay, so
all right.
So you had like a 9 seconds left.
All right, that's good to know.
Okay, do I get to add those 9 seconds to the next segment, or
let's try to keep it to 3
minutes
or less per segment. Yeah,
okay.
I'm all about time and making sure, if this were a big group, I just want to make sure that everyone had whatever time they were allotted.
Okay.
But less time is always nice too.
All right. The next 12 years, go.
12 to 24. By the time I was 12, we had moved to the place where we would live for the next 6 years. So it was in middle school, and this was the place where I would graduate from high school. It was upstate New York in a rural consolidated district. So lots of schools have been brought together to make one giant school, which was a pretty good-sized school in a probably 95% white community. But the thing I loved about this school when I got there, couldn't help noticing when I hit high school, student body president was black. The coolest twins you ever met, they were rock musicians. Yeah, they were both black. They were really good. The football coach was black. He had a bunch of kids, and they were all the most gregarious, outgoing kids. So my impression was, oh, this is wonderful. We don't have racial problems at this school because all of the black kids that I know are in leadership roles, and they're smart, and they're fun, and they're funny. I should point out that scooching back to that first 12 years, I was in Berkeley, California in 67 and 68, and I saw lots of riots from the university and heard all about civil rights. I watched my school break down in tears when Dr. King was assassinated. Robert Kennedy was killed during that time, and in my first 4 years, President John F. Kennedy was killed. So, my experience was there's a lot of conflict out there. Seeing the success that these black teenagers were having in this almost all-white school made me feel like everything was fine. And I tucked that away in the back of my mind. Lately, I've become reacquainted with some of the people I went to high school with. We're on Facebook together. And turns out the black kids were exposed to all kinds of racism, microaggressions, overt and covert, went right by me. I would have told you they had no trouble at all because that was my perception versus their perception of what was going on during that time. So just a very interesting time, but that was high school. While I was in high school, how am I doing for time?
You have 45 seconds.
I can do this in 45 seconds. After all that wandering about and living this rather bohemian lifestyle, I was striving for structure and order. And in high school, I joined the Mormon church, and they gave me structure and order. I graduated high school, went off to Brigham Young University, met the man to whom I have been married for almost 45 years now. We married right away and began our family right away. And that takes me up to being 24 when I was a young mom with 3 children under the age of 4 and all in diapers.
Okay, you did it with 6 seconds to spare.
Woo!
Okay, so now we're at the age 24. So 24 to 36.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Wow. This was huge time of change. And
Okay. 24 to 36. Go.
all right. Thank you. So Doug and I settled down in Pleasant Grove, Utah, because we met at Brigham Young University and had 3 babies right away, started raising a little family, living in Lillywhite, Utah. And during that time, the Mormon Church announced that although God previously had said that people with dark skin were marked by God to be hewers of wood and carriers of water, and the mark of Cain being a negative thing, God seems to have changed his mind in 1978, and suddenly it was okay for these people they were always allowed to be members of the Mormon Church, but were not allowed to hold the priesthood or enter the holiest places inside the temples. But then they could, and I was very happy about that. So that was going on. Meanwhile, I was dealing with being 24 years old and having 3 little ones who were a newborn, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. So they were quite a handful for a young mom. Doug was managing a local produce department at the grocery store. And that was our lives. And we talked to one another and we said, you know what? We forgot to finish college here. I had met him. He had been in a graduate program and I was in an undergraduate program. During that time, we both went back to school and we both completed master's degrees in public administration. And in the course of all this, as we raised our family and started trying to teach our kids about the wide world around, we realized we did not want to raise them to be Mormons, and so we chose to leave the church. Now, I was a teenage convert, but Doug's parents had raised him in the church. Indeed, he was a descendant of, if you know anything about Mormonism, they were pioneers who left from Missouri, and I mean, all Mormons were. Left from Missouri, moved to Salt Lake City and set up Salt Lake City, and he descended from some of those famous pioneers. So for him to leave was a pretty big deal. For me, I had only spent maybe 12 years in it when we made the decision to leave. When we actually left Utah, it was because I had a job offer in Illinois, and we moved because of my job, and Doug made the decision to be a stay-at-home dad. So talk about a huge structural shift. We made one.
You have 35 seconds.
35 seconds. All right. Well, we got to Illinois, and I was working for Weyerhaeuser Paper Company, and I was 30, and the kids then were 10, 8, and 6, and we had one more little boy just to round out Doug's stay-at-home dad experience so that he could have a baby, too. So our youngest son, Pat, was born at that time, and he was his father's baby.
Okay, so you have 9 seconds to spare. So
okay.
we'll wrap up.
I'm coming in at 6 and 9, so yeah.
Okay, so we're at 32. So 32 to.
No, we think we're 36.
Oh, sorry,
24 to 36.
36, yeah. And then so 36 to 48.
Yeah.
All right. So okay. At least I'm getting the math right.
All right. Good job. And thank you for doing the interviewing.
You're welcome. Okay, so 36 to 48. Go.
All right. 36 to 48. I was working in industry. This was fascinating because now I was a head of human resources at a manufacturing facility in Rockford, Illinois. This meant all those laws that were coming about in 67 and 68 around racial justice laws. I was in charge of enforcing those, of making sure that our workforce was diverse and that we were reaching out to the whole community. So I got to be very active in those. Also, in the time that I was working, the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Family Medical Leave Act became law. And so I got to see what it was like for a large corporation to institute new laws from a human resources perspective. So it was a time of great growth, and I really enjoyed the challenge of making sure we were up to obeying all of the laws that needed to be obeyed, both the ones that were from the 60s and the new ones that came into place. From a racial perspective, I shared an office with a woman named Carol, who was an engineer and also a black woman. And she and I, just for fun, instituted a craps game that we ran at the end of the first shift for pennies, because we just thought we needed a way to interact with the people on the factory floor. She was teaching quality principles and I was doing human resources. And so we had this craps game, and that was fun. And in the course of the craps game, Racial naming was a problem. Like, was Carol black? Was she a Negro? Was she African American? This would have been the, early 90s, I guess. And so some people from the factory floor said, Carol, what do you like to be called? Black? African American? Negro? And she looked at them all and round the craps game, and she said, I like to be called Carol. Which was fine, but didn't answer the question. And, it's weird. One of the things Tanya and I want to talk about is that an elephant in the room? Wow, do we not even have a way to describe each other? And do we need one? I don't know, but I was later in a meeting with all quality engineers and all HR people when someone said, Maura, the quality engineer at your facility just came up with a way to use less product and get better strength in the boxes you're manufacturing. We were manufacturing corrugated shipping containers, also known as cardboard boxes. And I said, oh, yeah, that was Carol. And they said, oh, which one is she? I want you to introduce me. Okay, Carol was the only person of color in the room. But I felt like I shouldn't say, oh, she's that black woman over there. So I said, let me introduce you. So I brought them over, and I said, Carol, this is Bob. Bob, this is Carol. Bob has some questions. But there was an elephant in the room kind of moment because I couldn't even say, yeah, she's that woman over there. She's African American. So elephant in the room type of issue. But, yeah, and so this is where this ends at 48, 36 to 48 here.
I think so.
Yeah. I made the transition in that time. Do I have any time left?
You just ran out.
Oh, I'm borrowing 6 seconds. No, we'll put it on to the next one. That's okay. 36 to 48. Go ahead.
Okay. 36. Wait. Yeah. Didn't we just finish that?
Yes. Now we're going to do 48 to 60.
48 to 60. Okay.
Yes,
48 to 60. All right. 48 to 60. Go.
All right. Well, I left large manufacturing. I moved to large pharmaceuticals, but left there too. And in 2000, at the age of 40, I moved into the biotechnology startup space, which was tons of fun. These were just brand new companies hiring lots of scientists, the kind of scientists who developed the vaccines that are currently in use from Pfizer and Moderna. Moderna would be an example of one of the tiny startup companies. I didn't work at Moderna, but the idea of a bunch of really smart scientists getting together and starting a company. That's where I was, but I left that when I was 50, I became a private consultant. So I had moved from just being an employee to being a contractor. So I was no longer on payroll. I was an independent contractor, just billing people for my time to perform human resources functions. It was during this time, ages 48 to 60, that I met Tanya and became interested in adding discussion around diversity, equity, and inclusion to the consulting that I was doing, and invited Tanya to join me with that. And then she and I have been studying how best to do that, to talk about allyship, this idea of the elephant in the room. So that was really the 48 to 60 was making the transition from being an employee to being a private consultant, being paid to come in and tell people what to do in human resources. But I had developed this great reputation for delivering workshops on interpersonal communication using insights discovery, which I still do. And so many people said, oh, Maura, we love your HR, but even more, can you come do these workshops for us? And so that has, by the time I was 60, had become the main part of my professional identity. I do far more delivering workshops than I do human resources work at all. And I get 3 more years because, I hit 60. Pandemic, my early 60s have been defined by pandemic and war. And how am I doing for time?
Let's see. You have 48 seconds.
Whoa! Well, we can talk more about this then, can't we? It's been fascinating to talk about the addition of suddenly, instead of being a burdensome, oh, yeah, we have to make sure we have a diverse workforce because the law requires it. Something about the pandemic and the murder of George Floyd led lots of business to saying, oh, wait. We have to do more because it's the right thing to do, because so much wrong has been done historically. So it has been a fascinating change to see people. I was just talking with someone who does the workshops that I do, and she said she had a client who was putting together a master services agreement for her, but until she made some statement about her commitment to diversity on her website.
Oh, that was the time. Okay.
I've used my decades.
Okay, so we're at 60 now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I just want to finish my thought because this was fascinating. This woman could not work for this company until her website demonstrated her commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So what a change to have seen the changes of the civil rights era of the 60s to go to where companies will not contract with you unless they can be sure you're at least trying.
Can you clarify, was it about the website that did not show that there was any diversity there?
She didn't have a statement saying she was committed to it. They just wanted something on her website that said this company is committed to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And what year was this?
This was last week.
Oh, last week. Okay, so it's like so we just
Right,
went
so-
through 60 years. So I'm like, okay, I'm just trying to.
Yeah, I got to wrap your head around that. Kind of exploded.
Okay. Because like for a second I thought, oh, this was back in like the
No, this was
80s
last
or
week.
90s
No,
or something. I do have some follow-up questions.
Awesome.
So based on what you told me, can you please explain why you and Doug decided to leave the Mormon church? Like what was it that convinced you that, okay, we don't want to be part of this organization anymore?
Well, part of it was we were always talking about church history, and I was taking church history as a college course. And we knew, but with any religion, there are myths. You know, one doesn't necessarily have to believe them. Mormonism at the time was encouraging that you had to believe every foundation myth as truth, as many religions do require. So it was hard for us to wrap our heads around that. But honestly, the thing that brought it all home to me is at the time, and you know, it's been so long since I've been a Mormon that this may have changed, but at the time, any sin related to sex was equal to any sin related to murder. It was that bad. So like if you cheated on a spouse, that was bad. But even masturbation was bad. So I was one evening reading a book to my oldest son, and as young men do from time to time, he was just reaching down into his pants and playing with himself a little bit. And I said, you know what, honey? Private parts are for private times. Right now, you and Mommy are reading a book. So let's just read this book. And we read the book, and I realized I didn't want anyone to say anything to him about his own sexuality, masculinity, or anything else other than private parts are for private times, and let's respect and love our bodies. And that was really what we said, yeah, we cannot raise our kids with all of that repression. And so when I took the job in Illinois, that's when we officially left, because I was, at that time, a student at Brigham Young University, so I couldn't exactly leave Mormonism because your tuition goes up.
Can you explain the crabs game you had mentioned?
Oh, the craps game?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's shooting dice, and you just, various rules apply various times. Everybody comes with pennies, only pennies. We didn't want to be really gambling. And you just bet on where the dice are going to fall, and you put your bets in, and it was just sort of like a team building thing, largely with like the union stewards and the head shop steward. We needed to interact with them, and we wanted to do it in a way that was beyond just they've filed a grievance or they want a raise for people who Carol has trained to do things in a different way because now they're better trained and have more skills. So rather than being so focused on that, we said, you know, let's just do something fun. And at the time in Illinois, shooting craps was a thing. And so we got dice and a little cardboard backdrop, and you shake them and you blow them, and you're hoping for sevens depending on the game that you're playing.
How do you pronounce it? Is it craps, like CRAPS, or
Yes.
crabs? Oh,
No,
craps.
craps.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, whole other issue if it's crabs. No, we weren't spreading those.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood.
Thank you for the clarification. That's why we have interviewers.
What pushed you to go from being an employee to a private contractor? Like, was money a factor?
Well, it happened completely naturally. I was involved with a startup company that actually had a Swiss parent company, and we were to create the U.S. entity of this Swiss company. So it was pretty huge, and I was the head of HR for what was going to be a growing U.S. company. At this point, I'd been, a regional HR leader, a manufacturing HR leader. Now I was the HR leader for the entire U.S. division of a Swiss company. So that was pretty exciting. And what our job was we were going to bring to market a drug that fought the flesh-eating bacteria known as MRSA. methylene-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, I think. So anyway, now I'm just talking science to show off. I don't really understand it. But that was our job, was to get this to market. And we were 97% sure that we were going to go to market with this drug 1 year after starting the company. And then the FDA did not approve our drug, and we had to shut down the company entirely. So in the process of shutting it down, we closed our U.S. office. There was nobody in the U.S. to pay me. Switzerland could not make me a Swiss employee, so they made me a contractor. So I started billing them for my time, and it was human resources and finance. We stayed until the very end to make sure that everyone leaving the company had a way to access benefits going forward. We had a rather generous severance. It was a nice departure, as departures go. I mean, people had good severance. They could buy benefits for at least 90 days after they left, and then hopefully would find another job. We made sure we rolled out their 401ks properly. So I stayed as a consultant with less and less work to do as I closed things out. Well, if you're familiar at all with the world of biotech in the Boston area where I live now, it is like a big family or a small town. Everybody knows everybody. People heard I was contracting, and they said, Maura, you're a contractor now? Because I really need someone to do human resources, but only maybe 10 hours a week or 10 hours a month at my little facility. Could you do that for me? Or, Maura, we used to work together, because at this point I'd worked in many companies, and you gave such great workshops. Could you come give those workshops for me at my company? So it happened pretty naturally, and I loved it.
Okay.
And I still do.
Why did you start your family so young?
Oh, yeah. Well, when I was growing up with my single mom and living out in the country especially, I am a confirmed extrovert. Mom is a confirmed introvert. So all alone in the country was great for her. But summers when I wasn't at my grandparents' house, I had nothing to do. It was just me all alone in a rundown house in the country. So I watched TV. And on TV, I watched Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver, reruns of your classic white American family in the suburbs. And I thought, wow, that's what I want to be. I wish I could have that. And I think I, just as soon as I possibly could, of course, I joined the Mormon church, which had that sense of structure, and I met lots of families that were very large and started very young. So that seemed like just the right thing to do. I think I was acting out my need to be part of a big, loving family. You could talk to my kids about their perception of what was going on at the time, but you asked why I did it, not if I was any good at it. So, yeah, I think I had this real need for a stable family beyond living with a single mom.
Maura, what was it like being a young college student with 3 kids to raise?
Challenging and liberating. I was really not cut out to be a stay-at-home mom. I mentioned before I was the extrovert's extrovert. I need other people and lots of them and intellectual stimulation. It was wonderful. The problem is we had very little money. The great thing about Brigham Young University for people with minimal funds is I was eligible for Pell Grant because we didn't have much money, and the Pell Grant paid for everything, all my tuition. In fact, it paid housing when I was a single student. So I was able to do that with minimal debt, at least for my undergraduate work. It was just a lot of crazy scheduling. I tried to only be in school when my kids were in school, which was okay on the undergraduate level. But when I went into graduate school, there were courses that were going on before my kids could be in school yet. They were early in the morning or they were later in the afternoon. And I went to the school administration and explained my difficulty, and they were wonderfully helpful. I think, even the university was like, wow, we really need more women in these programs. When I graduated with my master's degree, I can report with a smile, half the women in the program were moms, which is to say I had children. Tara did not. Everyone else was men who graduated with us. But they were very accommodating. I needed to take a senior level accounting class and in that program, and they just searched all the other programs and found one that met at 1 p.m. so that I could finish accounting and hurry home for the kids. So they were actually really accommodating, and it was delightful, except for how hard it was to work. I became a one draft wonder. I sat at my kitchen table writing papers by hand. This was, 80s, so no laptops or anything like that. So I wrote by hand and then paid somebody to type my papers for me. I did not have time to rewrite. I wrote one draft of every paper and sent it to be typed and hoped for the best and turned it in. So, yeah, it was okay, and it was not okay. I think the thing that stands out about me is I so often hear, a young woman is pregnant and she's going to continue the pregnancy and have the baby, and people act as if she's ended her life somehow, that like, oh, well, you've just gone into motherhood. It's like, no, you can still go to school. It is a whole lot harder, a whole lot more work, and you can't do the extracurricular. I mean, you don't go to the parties or anything like that. But in terms of getting the education, having your first baby when you're 20 is not the end of your life. You can still do all the things that you want to do when you realize, oh my goodness, maybe I don't just want to be a mom. There's a lot that's out there. So I like to point out that it can be done. I did it with 3 of them. But I did have a very supportive spouse. He was always willing to make time available for me to write papers and try to keep the chaos down to a dull roar.
What advice do you have for other people who have children before they have any post-high school education or experience?
Focus on the education. Find something you can do that will make a good living. That, my undergraduate work was piecemeal. I had taken classes here and there that were of interest to me, that were child development, family relations type of classes. When finally I decided, hey, I need an actual degree, and I went to the university, they said, well, there's no job you can get with the degree that you're heading for, but if you do that degree with a pre-professional option, you can go to graduate school and maybe find something where you can actually find work. So I would just say focus on where, especially if you're a single mom, right? I mean, you're going to need a revenue stream. And I hate to tell people, oh, abandon your visions of artistic work, such as I admire you so much for having an artistic career, Corrine, as I've followed you as a friend of Pat. But there has to be, first of all, the reality that you can learn other skills. You find some childcare, do what you need to do, unless you're totally committed to just being at home with somebody who can pay you to be there. I don't know. I feel like every human needs a skill they can do to bring in some money to support themselves. So, and I just think young moms should not be afraid to do that. So that'd be my advice. Don't be afraid. You can still do whatever it was you were going to do before you had that baby right away. It's just going to be a lot harder, but you can do it.
So going away from being a mom,
yes,
and going more towards business,
yes,
specifically your business, Great Brook Leadership. What is Great Brook Leadership?
So when I left being a full-time employee to being a consultant, a friend of mine he had hired me for my first small company biotech job, he had already gone off on his own into consulting, and he had created a website called Great Brook Biotech, where he was inviting anyone who was working independently to use that as their company name. And so I did things under the name Great Brook Biotech, which still exists. Now, the reason it's called Great Brook, which is really hard to pronounce for a business name, any marketing person would tell you, oh my goodness, do not. Great Brook Biotech, I congratulate you for saying it well, because it's not easy. Jason and I both live near Great Brook Farm State Park, and we love it, and that's how the name came up. So it was, Great Brook Biotech was a holding company for anybody who was working in the biotech industry who was not a scientist. So a number of us, there were finance people. And in fact, we did have one scientist join us too. If you just needed a place to land, we didn't have employees or anything like that, but it was a place where you could list your services at Great Brook Biotech. My services began to be so very specific, especially around workshop delivery, and then people had to buy product from me, the handouts and things that go with workshop delivery. I was not comfortable telling them just pay Maura Snow because Great Brook Biotech had no way to pay individuals. So I created Great Brook Leadership as my spin-off from there and created it as a true financial entity so that it could receive payments in and out, and I got it its own tax number. And so now with Great Brook Leadership, while I don't have employees, I have people who do workshops, who bill me for their time doing workshops, people like Tanya, who does various outreach and invoices for her time. If you look on my website, you see the names of people doing various pieces of work for me, and I just needed a standalone financial entity. But Great Brook Leadership is all about providing people with the skills to have a workforce, much like Carol and I were talking about in the days of the craps games. She was teaching quality principles for manufacturing, but it's how you do it, and that's where the human resources piece comes in. So it's the manner in which you interact while creating the very best product that's also important, and that's what Great Brook Leadership is about, how we interact in the workplace.
What made you want to then start this podcast?
And this is the very recent things, right? I've mentioned that I use Insights Discovery as my training platform, and I was talking with Insights Discovery has partner outreach people who work with small consultants like myself who use their products. We have advisors from the company, and I was talking about some of the work that Tanya and I were doing around using that process of Insights Discovery to help enter into discussions around the elephant in the room around race if you need to. And Insights Discovery, again, is a personality typing tool similar to Myers-Briggs or DISC or based, anything that's out there that's based in Jungian psychology. So anyway, the Insights company, I told them what Tanya and I were trying to do, and they suggested, oh, you know what? You two should do a podcast. And I said, hey, Tanya, Marissa thinks we should do a podcast, and Tanya thought so too. So we decided we would do a podcast, realized we didn't know much about podcasting, but I knew Corrine Joseph, who does know some things about podcasting, and so we reached out to Corrine, and here you are, our very own podcast producer, director, and knower of all things tech.
I do my best. What is one thing you hope to accomplish by the end of this season?
This podcast season, I hope to provide some examples and tools for people to dive in and have good conversations with each other in their personal lives, in the workplace. I think Tanya and I were talking about we humans can't help but form families, even when we're not families, even in the workplace. We form groups and tribal groups, and I'm not saying every workplace needs to, dig deep into their guts and have terribly meaningful conversations, but we also need to get beyond the superficial because we're seeing each other every day, at least on Zoom. So my hope is that the podcast shares some ideas for how people can do that. We're going to interview some other people and just what are the elephant in the room issues that in case it is appropriate to discuss them, how can we discuss them? So that's what I'm hoping.
When I spoke to you the other day, you mentioned you were getting ready to publish a book. Can you tell us what it's called and what the story is about?
The book is called Can We Be Friends? And it is not a management text. It's a children's book with an illustrator. And collaborating with an illustrator has been a whole lot of fun. It is, I have to give a little background, pandemic hit. My partner Doug and I are living outside Boston, no longer needing to spend an hour and 40 minutes commuting every day. So we took that hour and 40 minutes and started walking around at the local farm, Great Brook Farm State Park, hence the name Great Brook again. And we just became fascinated by beavers and geese. And we watched some goslings grow up. We noticed where there were beaver dams and beaver lodges. And this whole story about a gosling and a beaver kit becoming friends and getting into all kinds of mischief and dealing with the fact that one of them is a bird and the other is a beaver. You don't usually have friends that way, but that's what they deal with. And so that's what the book is all about, is how do we communicate when we're very, very different friends, and how do we respect each other's different lifestyles while still being friends. And it's called Can We Be Friends? And we just published it, and it will be available on Amazon very soon.
Oh, great. So I was about to ask, okay, so it'll be on Amazon. Is it an ebook? Is it a physical book?
It's both. It's a paperback and an ebook. It's a Kindle. There's a Kindle version and a paperback version.
Okay.
And Donna Mitchelson is my illustrator. She's great.
Is it just on Amazon? Like, will it be available in stores, or is it?
I am so new to this. I am even more new to book writing than I am to podcasting. So I would say this is another era of the 60s, trying new things. Donna and I are searching about to see if we can find a book agent. So otherwise, our plans are we will print copies and I'll put them in very local bookstores that sell books by local authors. Donna has some interest. The places where we both hike, she hikes at the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey, and I hike at Great Brook Farm State Park, have similar creatures, and she's been drawing and illustrating, honestly, since she was 10. So she has places that she knows where she's on the board of the Mosaic Society, which has places where it sells books. So, yeah, this is very much a grassroots type of thing. I'm going to have a stack of books and just walk up to places and say, would you like to sell these? Pretty good story.
Is this book for, like, young children? Like, can adults read this?
Yes.
Who's this for?
Well, I very carefully used the Fleischman-Kincaid grade level analysis that you can get in Word documents and kept it at a third grade reading level. It's, for probably third grade and below. It's older people are welcome to read it as well. And I'm thinking of incorporating it into my workshops and just giving it away to scientists who come to talk about communication, because there are examples of all the personality types made manifest by the creatures I'm writing about.
Aside from people listening or watching the podcast, like, where can people follow you online?
Well, greatbrookleadership.com is my website where you can learn a little bit about what I offer professionally. And then the Great Brook podcast has an Instagram account and a Facebook account. And I'm looking to you for this because you're the one pushing all of these. I don't know. Where can they find me online?
Well, I know yes, I think you mentioned your Instagram account. So I know there's that. I know you also have LinkedIn, but I don't think LinkedIn is so much of a social
LinkedIn is
network.
My business account, and certainly you can just look for me by name, Maura Snow on LinkedIn.
Maura, right. I want to say thank you for letting me come on and just ask you some questions so that, our audience can have a chance to get to know you a bit better. And so hopefully, they felt they felt more connected to you as I did, because a lot of this stuff I was not aware of. I think with the exception of the book you had mentioned, everything you had told me today is brand new information.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, wow, I'm really learning something. So I want to say thank you for coming on.
Well, I want to thank you very much for signing on to be the producer here, and for stepping in to do this interview portion. As Tanya and I were talking about your suggestion that we share more about our backgrounds, we realized that when the two of us start talking, we go off on such tangents that we need a little more structure. So I wanted to thank you. Hi, I'm Maura Snow. My co-host Tanya Middleton and I would like to thank you for listening to this episode of the Great Brook Podcast. Our producer and editor is Corinne Joseph. Special thank you to Acton TV for use of their studio located in Acton, Massachusetts. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also check us out on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram at Great Brook Podcast.